heard the other day that it's Groundhog Day again. And this is week 5, 2025 again. And we're going to talk about the Avatara, the descent of the divine into human form. Not just in you and I, but in the great masters of all religions and paths. It's interesting for several reasons. First off, I want to say how much I am thrilled every time I hear that quote from the Bhagavad Gita. It's the promise of the scriptures. It's the promise of our immortality. O Bharata, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate on earth, taking visible form. I come to destroy evil and reestablish virtue. Now, is there anybody here who thinks that it's a good idea? Okay. But we're going to talk about how that happens exactly. So, it just happens to be also a day in which we are doing our first annual State of the Sangha, the Ananda Sangha of Washington. We've never done this before, but this will be the first, and it's a very special day. It's rather a coincidence that the affirmation for the day, which comes every year on week 5, is sharing, because that's what we'll be talking about later today at our luncheon and so on. You know, in India, there's a term for what the disciple gives to the guru in return in a material form, and it's called dakshina. And dakshina is that gift that you read that the disciple gives, and you read about that. The story that comes to my mind specifically comes from the Mahabharata, when Drona, the great preceptor teacher of the martial arts, has finished his training of the cousins, and he asks then, or he is asked perhaps, what dakshina would he like? And another aspect of the concept of dakshina is that the term is also used as an aspect of the goddess Lakshmi, who symbolizes, represents success, wealth, prosperity, and so forth. And just as it said in the reading a few moments ago, I think the thing that, particularly when you talk about recognition of gifts and giving back, we think so automatically in material forms, which is fine. But when I think of, you know, the Western response to gods and goddesses, Lakshmi and Ganesh and so forth, I think a lot of Westerners kind of shudder for various reasons we don't need to get into. But what we don't realize is that everything exists comes from a higher plane of consciousness. That these bodies, all these so-called objects to which we're so greatly attached, already pre-exist on an energetic and causal form. And so when we personify certain energies like success, prosperity, gratitude, and so forth, and when the different faith traditions and teachers throughout time and history have talked about and personified these energies, they are as personified as you and I are, because it's all consciousness. That's the basic teaching. So whatever resistance that some people might have to that process of personification is simply a resistance to the fact that we are personifications of consciousness. And we have certain attributes. Some people are very successful. Some people are chronic failures, and so on and so forth. The source and the solution, when change is needed, always exists on a higher level, because that's where it comes from. I wanted to read, if I can find it here, something that always impressed me. I won't get into my own thoughts on the matter, but let's just say I was born with similar thoughts. So this is chapter 7 of the autobiography, the chapter in which he talks about the founding of the yoga school in India. And so Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, addresses him as follows. He says, "Why are you so averse to organizational work?" The master's question startled me a bit, Yogananda writes. "It is true that my private conviction at the time was that organizations were a hornet's nest." I don't think they say hornet's nest in India. That's clearly an Americanism. But anyway, "It is a thankless task, sir," I answered. "No matter what the leader does or doesn't do, he's criticized." "Do you want the whole divine chana for yourself alone?" Sri Yukteswar asked. My guru's retort was accompanied by a stern glance. Some of us can only imagine the stern glance of Sri Yukteswar as being a little bit penetrating. "Could you or anyone else achieve God contact through yoga if a line of generous-hearted masters had not been willing to convey their knowledge to others?" He asked. "God is the honey. Organizations are the hives. Both are needed. Any form is useless, of course, without the spirit, but why should you not start busy hives full of the spiritual nectar?" Then Yogananda goes on and he writes, "His counsel moved me deeply, although I made no outward reply." I always find that sort of interesting. "An adamant resolution arose in my heart. I would share with my fellows, so far as lay in my ability and power, the unshackling truths I had learned at my Guru's feet. Lord," I prayed silently, "may thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of my devotion, and may I be able to awaken thy love in all hearts." When, therefore, in the great tradition that has always existed, and in the refinement of human consciousness, whereby this appears spontaneously to give back to one from whom we have received, to give back in recognition for the gifts of life and health and wealth, etc., that we have received, this natural instinct, at least to the refined consciousness of people, is how we work through the miasma, the delusion, the attachment to those things that we give back as not being their real source. I remember somewhere Yogananda talking about, he was very public during the 1930s, the so-called Depression. The word depression has taken on some new meanings since those days, but in any case, maybe it still fits. But during those times, he said, if I needed a job, I'd go out and shake the world for a job. And at times when I've talked to somebody or a person from time to time with a chronic issue around finding employment, go out and just help. Don't think about what you get. Don't think about money. If you're out of work, do something. Be serviceful. Your family, okay, it starts at home, of course. What about your neighbors? What about your local community? You know, I've said this before over the years, but to me the great tragedy of things like poverty, when I sometimes see someone at the street corner and so forth, particularly in this culture, there's no lack of assistance there. The great tragedy isn't really hunger or income. It's not having the ability or the desire or whatever it might be to serve creatively your fellows. The inability, for whatever reason may be, to not give back is the tragedy, because it's in giving that we receive. It says in the Bhagavad Gita that the great cycle of life takes place by the fact that as the clouds bestow upon us the rain and the snow, and gives their burden, their wealth to the plants and the animals and so forth, all of life is a cycle of giving, receiving, and giving and receiving. And when we think too much that, you know, my bank account or things that I own are mine, number one. Yogananda, he has a story. He came to this country and saw all the nice homes and stuff, and he saw how attached people were to their home. And he said, you know, in a few years, somebody else is going to be in that home. All the attachment you feel and the pride you feel for all the little knickknacks that you have around the house. I remember after my mother died, I think within 24 hours, me and my brothers were in her room with sacks and that went to the dumpster. Just like your body, it goes to the dumpster for all intents and purposes. So, you know, we get blindsided by the materiality of this world, not realizing that its essence is immaterial, it's energetic, it's consciousness. And so that's the great gift. The great gift of giving back is to release that attachment, to see that it all comes from a higher source. But it does remind me, you know, Yogananda had a keen sense of humor, as did our founder, who trained by Yogananda, Swami, where is he? There he is, Swami Kriyananda. But when he went to Europe in 1935 on his way back to India for a visit, he went to many different countries, and one of them was Scotland. And in Scotland, he learned how, you know, how different nationalities sort of get characteristics and so forth. And I don't care whether it's politically correct or not, but at that time he learned that the Scots were considered tightwads, okay? Just make it plain and simple. And so he heard two jokes about the tightwads of Scotland, and I'm only going to tell one of them. And so these three Scotsmen were so parsimonious that when they went to Sunday service, they sat in the front row. And when the time came for the collection plate to come around, one guy pretended to faint and the other two guys carried him out the front row. So don't you try that. But you know, the Avatara is the descent of God into human form. It's taught from India and Sanatana Dharma, and the way Yogananda expressed it is somewhat contrary to the tradition in Christianity and even in India, where it is held, I'll just speak of Christianity, where Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was born as if, you know, boom, like this. Well, he said that's not really the truth. The truth is Krishna, Buddha, Rama, and all these, Yogananda, these great avatars are like you and I, as the reading said, human beings. But coupled with the teaching of reincarnation, which Krishna speaks openly of in the first chapter, a second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, coupled with reincarnation, we see that impulse that you and I have for perfection, to see peace and harmony in the world, to have an appropriate income, to have health, and to have perfect relationships. That I remember the famous Christian apologist who converted to Catholicism in the 30s. He was a close friend of J.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. And I remember in his book, Mere Christianity, which was a collection of his radio talks during World War II in Britain. He was in Oxford, he taught at Oxford University and so on. And he made the comment that the very fact that you and I have a conscience, that you and I want to do good, that we seek perfection, automatically says, where does that come from? I mean, if you think of the law of survival or, you know, dog eat dog or however you want to put that, that doesn't quite fit, does it? But there is innate, at least in those with a certain degree of refinement. After all, you don't particularly expect refinement from a snake, but in human life, we see that awakening of refinement. And so, the avatar then comes in order, it's the proof of our divinity, in other words. If there was no demonstration of perfection in human form, then to say that we are made in the image of God doesn't really make a lot of sense. To say that our destiny is to achieve oneness in God doesn't really make much sense. And so the existence of a human form in which this perfection exists, this power over nature exists, is that demonstration. And we say it every week in the Festival of Light. A prayer of love went up from earth, and you responded. A prayer of love, in my mind, includes the desire for that perfection, includes the desire for that peace, that harmony, that integrity, that wholeness that we seek. A ray of your light flashed down, a ray of your light flashed out from the heart of infinity, burst downward through night skies of consciousness, and was born on earth for the redemption of mankind in human form. Many times as that light descended, drawn to earth by the call of aspiring love. And greater no love can be than this, that from a life of perfection and joy in God, that such a one should be reborn. This is what we celebrate today. And yet, as the reading indicated, the Avatara appears in human form, which is what we are talking about today. But the deeper meaning of the term in Sanskrit is the entire creation is the Avatara. There is nothing else. That's the core precept of Advaita Vedanta, of Sanatana Dharma, which is there. And in Judaism, they say the same thing, though they don't understand what they say. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. This is what we celebrate. This is the universal, perennial philosophy of Sanatana Dharma. And not just in general, not just in sort of abstract form, but in human form, in each one of us. Now, it's not new, but it is revolutionary individually to you and I. This is why we say we celebrate the grace of God that has come anew to earth through our line of masters into this age. In every age, Krishna says, I come. Now, one of the things that Swami Kriyananda, our founder and a direct disciple of Yogananda, would sometimes talk about, because Yogananda, he only came in 1920, it's a fairly new ray of this light, of this universal light, into our planet, into a new age. He said, down through the ages, the different avatars are like, they have whole families. We could think in terms of the way that we think, Buddhists, for example, or Muslims, and that kind of thing. But even those are just sort of outward, because each of those families have certain qualities that they express. And so Ananda Sangha here in Bothell is part of a great outpouring, a great growing family of souls of self-realization, which represent a new direction in human consciousness, accepting that there's nothing new under the stars, but a new direction in the larger trend of consciousness. We've been going out for a long time. Our science and so forth, and our consumerism represents our going out. The time has come to balance that by going within. That tradition was largely lost, and Christianity existed in the very beginning in the great desert monks and so forth who went out and so on. The Eastern Orthodox Church retained the mystical communion that was typified in the early stages of Christianity, but the Western Church more or less lost that. I mean, there's little pockets of monasticism here and there, but by and large, it's all fine, but it's still very outward, humanitarian, ritual, dogma, all productive of, unfortunately, sectarianism. So a new family has been born, brought by the call of our hearts for that peace and harmony that we feel is so deeply needed. And just as the Christians speak of their membership or whatever, disciples of Christ, as being a family, being the body of Christ, there's a great truth in that. Because when he says, where did it go? Well, anyway, when he says, when virtue declines, etc., I incarnate on earth, who is this I? Was it just Jesus Christ in a body or Krishna in a body? No, that's a misunderstanding. The I refers to that indwelling spirit. We are the body of the lineage of self-realization. We are the hearts, the hands, the minds, and the souls that constitute the vibrating body of consciousness that is helping to give birth to a new awakening to go within. That's what we celebrate today. And the natural impulse and the recognition of that is to share. That's why we're here. Those of us who have a certain inclination and I don't know what I would call it, a familiarity with meditation and whatever our past life samskars might be in that direction. And we saw this with our founder and friend, Swami Kriyananda. We saw this with Yogananda. He ran off to the Himalayas, 3 times, maybe 4 times? And Divine Mother said, come back, you can't go there, you have a job to do. It was the same with Swamiji. He had a deep desire to be a hermit. I'm at a point in my life where if I could escape, I would. But I can't quite yet, but I'm working on it. In any case, this is the interesting part. Those of us who feel in tune with the inner path are naturally somewhat withdrawn, naturally quiet. We don't generally, for the most part, maybe Padma does, but for the most of us, we don't march around with signs and chanting and stuff. When our kids played baseball, they play whatever they play and stuff, and soccer, she'd be like this. I'd hide in the corner like, ah. So most of us aren't that way, but the time has come to form a Sangha, because our sacrifice, our giving is not to hide, is not to go within, to come out and share this great revolution in consciousness that is needed for the redemption of many souls. When I say redemption, I mean that in the awakening of the peace and harmony that is ours. Now, each lineage has certain characteristics. Each disciple is like a window onto that ray that is coming through. But then there's a saying in India, and I've never traced it to its source. Swami used to mention it. He said, all Krishna's soldiers were like Krishna. Well, there is that feeling when many of us here have gone to different Ananda centers, and in India even, and Italy, and so on, and we may not speak the local language, but we feel the attunement. And at the same time, I remember a good friend of mine, when we lived at Ananda Village those many years, and I would putter around on my motorbike with a milk crate strapped by bungee cords on the back with my 2 kids parked in it. They'd have put me in jail if I did it now, but somebody said, you're really unique, and so on. So we're all unique from the get-go, from the very beginning. And I wanted to read from Chapter 7, The Levitating Saint, Mukunda, Yogananda's boyhood name. He had an uproarious laugh, and the other disciples didn't like that when he would visit Bhattacharya Mahashai. And so Bhattacharya Mahashai said, let Mukunda come when he will. The sage's eyes twinkled. My rule of seclusion is not for my comfort, but for that of others. Worldly people do not like the candor which shatters their delusions. Saints are not only rare, they're disconcerting. Even in scripture, they are often found to be embarrassing. I remember when I first came to Ananda and met Swamiji in one of his early talks, he said, the saints come to disabuse you, to demolish your idea of what is sanctity. Sort of the piety that we see in religion, and all the bowing and scraping, and all the all that kind of thing. It's like romance. It may attract you in the beginning, but it can't sustain you. At some point, you have to do the hard work of giving, of serving, of praying, of meditating, and learning, as Sri Yukteswar would say, learning how to behave. And so Swamiji had that character of sort of demolishing people's fantasies about the spiritual path. And in that, he had a sort of delightful sense of humor, sometimes irreverent, and that's always appealed to me since it comes naturally. But he delighted in something that was completely foreign to me, which is the humor of the British satirist P.G. Wodehouse. Now, a lot of my Indian friends actually grew up with Wodehouse because he was British, but me being a crude, uneducated American, never heard of the fellow until Swami talked about, would read those stories, and they were always a delight. So there's certain qualities in this ray. Humor is one of them. Joy is another. And for Ananda has a specific aspect of that ray that Yogananda sowed into the ether. And that specific aspect is community, is Sangha, is fellowship. Yes, he expressed it in terms of a residential kind of community, but we see here in the evolution of Dwapara Yuga that community has a much bigger aspect to it. It includes the virtual community of sharing and giving. And Ananda, over the years, we've had so many different, I remember after the fire at Ananda Village, we lost all but one of the homes. There weren't any jobs, and there certainly weren't any homes. And about 40 of us moved to nearby Nevada City and created an ashram. Our house there in Nevada City on Zion Street, I think Roy remembers it, was an ashram. And we had a 100-year-old garage that we re-sheetrocked and called it the Garage of the Eternal Religion. And I think I did my first Sunday service there in 1970 something or another. But that idea of community, of going out, is very much part of that. So how do we tune into, because we are all so different in our circumstances, how do we tune in to the Guru to know what is ours to do? Well, the eyes of the Masters is a great way to tune in, Swamiji reminds us. And to pray in your heart that the Master guide you. We have the purification ceremony each Sunday morning in which we say, and I will take charge of your life. Open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. Because the teaching of self-realization is that the self is not who we think, that the self is much broader. We are the body, mind, and soul of divinity through the ray of light that's been sent here, which is through this particular ray of the Masters. And so the question comes up very often because there is the great tradition that we receive from India. You see, in Christianity, there was only one guru. It's just a person. But in the East, it's a principle. Something that, Bharata, in each age, I incarnate in human form. And so the question has to be asked then, he's not here. What do I do? Swami Kriyananda was asked that, and he said, I don't know if Yogananda ever said this to anybody else. He said, but basically, each disciple has to have one physical contact with the Guru in order for that diksha, for that transmission to be ignited, to be initiated. And so Kriyananda was really puzzled at that, because even then, while he was with Yogananda, Yogananda would send him out to give discipleship and Kriya initiation to various people, even though Yogananda was alive and in the body. And so he explained that this happens through the transmission of that ray through human form. And yet at the same time, even when Yogananda was in human form, Kriyananda said that it was like a hotel, people checking in, checking out, because the guru didn't meet their expectations or whatever their problem was. It's a both and, you see. The transmission, the purpose of creation is for the creation to awaken first in self-awareness and then in superconsciousness, awareness of the divinity which is playing hide and seek with us. It is a necessary aspect of the intention of the Creator that we awaken through the maya, the miasma, the veil of delusion of form, we awaken to the spirit beneath the form. And so it is right and correct that there be a transmission. We recognize this in the training of airplane pilots. We recognize this in churches where they ordain people one to the next. This transmission is recognized instinctively and intuitively in the human experience. So that's one part. But the transmission must be fed by the inner attunement. Because even though Yogananda was in the body, he said, as he said, there are rats and mice here on this hill where we live, but they're not getting self-realization by that mere proximity to this form. There has to be the inner attunement. Both are necessary. When Jesus Christ was asked for a summary of his teachings, he gave the greatest principle, the only principle there really is, to love thy Lord thy God. I'm quoting the Old Testament, not his words. Love the Lord thy God with thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself. When Yogananda came, he called his work at first. It was a non-starter if you're into advertising. Yogoda Satsanga. Well, what's an American in 1925 going to do with a word like Yogoda Satsanga? Nothing. So somebody convinced him to change it to self-realization fellowship. Okay, it's both. Self-realization is the inner path. Fellowship is the outer path of sharing. That's what we celebrate today in this, I'll call it a Dakshina Satsang after lunch. And now whispers